Hello and welcome to Yes, I'm a Designer. My name is Martin Perhiniak. I'm an Adobe certified expert and instructor. In this video, I'm going to show you all the differences between Photoshop CS6 and Photoshop CC 2015. To make it easier to navigate within the video, I included a list in the description below. So without any further delay, these are the new features of Photoshop CC 2015 since the introduction of Creative Cloud. The perspective warp is a new transformation feature with which you can change the viewing angle in images. Thanks to the Adobe Mercury graphics engine, now the healing brush tool also gives you a live preview while you are using it. The focus area is a great new selection method which can concentrate on the details which are in focus, and you can very quickly and easily separate them from the out of focus areas in an image. The new color blending option for content-aware features makes them even more useful. I show you first without color blending, so the color option for content-aware move tool is set to 0, and I move the cloud on the top, blend it in, and as you can see it's not perfect. Let's just load that selection back once again, and now use color blending on maximum, which is 10. I move it roughly in the same position again, let go, and you will see it blends in perfectly. Camera shake was a great new sharpening feature introduced in Photoshop Creative Cloud, and its effect can be easily seen in this comparison of before and after. The Smart Sharpen filter has been greatly improved as well. If you look at the options inside, you can find the old version, the CS6 version, and you can still revert back to that if you want to. But in this comparison, you can see the difference between CC and CS6. When you merge images into a panorama using the Photomerge command, now you will have the option to choose content-aware fill the transparent areas automatically. Photoshop will create a separate layer for the merge results so you can check before and after. The content-aware move tool now has a new feature called transform on drop, which means whenever you use it, before you apply it, you can scale and rotate the end result, and then it will blend into its new environment. The image size dialog box has been also improved. It has a preview option now, and it has a very useful resampling method called preserve details, with which the enlargement of images look much better. There are two new options for the blur gallery filter, path blur and spin blur. They both have very intuitive controls, so you can very quickly create effects to your liking. Both the Liquify filter and the blur gallery now can be used as smart filters, which allows non-destructive editing using these tools. The blur gallery can now restore noise in images. So after you apply a blur and you see that the original noise from the image is completely blurred out and that makes it look fake, you can always apply the grain and match it to the original grain in the image. In Photoshop, if you turn a layer into a smart object, you can then now use the Camera Raw filter as a smart filter, which will then directly affect the changes inside Photoshop. The Dehaze feature is a new effect in Adobe Camera Raw, and it can improve the quality of images which lack contrast and detail. In Camera Raw, the spot removal tool was only good for creating a circle and replace an item based on another content nearby. But now in CC, we can just draw over an item and then the spot removal tool will work more similarly to the patch tool in Photoshop. The radial filter in Camera Raw is a great way to locally create adjustments. These circles can be moved around and adjusted similarly to graduated filters. The upright feature in Camera Raw can be found under Lens Corrections, and it's a great tool to quickly remove perspective distortion in images. In Camera Raw, all you need to do to straighten an image is to double click on the Straighten tool and then accept the auto straightening. You can now create seamless panoramas directly in Adobe Camera Raw using RAW files. All you need to do is to select them all and then from the film strip choose Merge to Panorama. The advantage of this is that your end result is going to be a very high resolution Camera Raw file. You can now merge Camera Raw files into HDR images, and again, the advantage of doing this is that the end result is going to stay a Camera Raw file. Thanks to the Adobe Mercury graphics engine, most of the heavy-duty features in Photoshop are much faster. For instance, the Liquify filter now works with much bigger brush sizes. I'm using around 1000 pixel size brush, and as you can see, I can very easily move things around, and holding down Alt or Option I can also reconstruct things again very quickly and easily. Behance is the leading free online platform to showcase and discover creative work, and now it's part of the Adobe Creative Cloud family. All you need to do from Photoshop is to go to File, Share on Behance, and then once you give your project a title, you can upload it straight to your portfolio online. Included in the Creative Cloud subscription, you also have access to the Behance ProSite feature, which will allow you to customize your portfolio even further and even use your own domain name. It has never been easier to use Photoshop on multiple computers thanks to the Sync Settings option. All you need to do is to upload all your preferences, keyboard shortcuts, workspaces, swatches, so on and so forth, and then on the other computer simply download them. In case of a computer or application crash, Photoshop now creates automatic backups, and under the file handling options in preferences, you can actually set up how frequently you want Photoshop to save each of the open documents. A frequently requested feature by users was to be able to move a layer into a group and have it on top of that layer stack and not at the bottom. So now it works. If I just drag a new layer into a layer group, it will stay on the top of that layer group. You can now use adjustments on smart objects as smart filters. So in the adjustments menu, not only shadow highlights and HDR toning will be available, but all the other adjustments, for example, vibrance. And once you apply it, again, it will be non-destructively assigned, similarly to an adjustment layer, but in this case, it becomes a smart filter. Saving images in the background is a preference under the file handling options. And what it means is whenever you save a file, you can actually continue working in Photoshop, and the saving procedure is going to happen simultaneously. On the status bar, you can follow or cancel the progress of the file save. Another user requested change is that with a single click on the lock icon on the background layer, you can turn it into a normal layer. With conditional actions, now you can create much more complex and smarter actions in Photoshop. All you need to do is, while recording an action, to go to the panel menu and choose Insert Conditional. Here you will find lots of predefined if statements that you can use for your conditional actions. There is a long-awaited improvement on the Layer Style dialog box. Now you can add multiple properties like stroke or drop shadow, and the limit for each of them is 10. So if I add another stroke, I can also decide which one should be on top. For example, this one I can change in color, and then I can reduce the size of it and maybe keep it on the center. So that way now I have two strokes on the same object. Adobe Stock is a marketplace for royalty-free, high-quality photos, illustrations, and graphics. But the best thing about it is that you can purchase, access, and manage the images directly within your Creative Cloud applications. So, for example, within Photoshop, all you need to do is to go to the Libraries panel, click on Stock, and that will take you to the Adobe Stock website where you can search for an image. And once you find the one that you like, let's say I would like to work with this image here, I just have to choose to download it. and it will download a watermark version of it into my library. So once I go down at the bottom, you will see it updates there. I can just drag and drop it into my composition. I can make it fit into the size that I need. Let's say I want to use it here on this frame. So I'm just going to place it in. And the next time, if I want to actually buy the license, all I need to do is to go back to the libraries panel, right click on the image and choose license image. If you are planning to use Color in Photoshop, now you will find the Adobe Color Themes panel, which is pretty much the same thing, but whenever you create a color theme, now it's going to be saved and stored inside the Libraries panel. The Libraries panel is showing you all the files that you have in your cloud-based storage, which comes with Creative Cloud license. So if you have anything in your design that you would like to reuse next time, all you need to do is to select it from the Layers panel and click on adding it to your library. That way you can reuse it in Photoshop or in all the other Adobe applications like Illustrator and InDesign. You have much more control over vector shapes in Photoshop thanks to the improvement on the Properties panel. We have access to things like changing the corner radius on rectangles and squares, and even changing the radius. You can copy that radius values over from one of the shapes onto another by just simply copy pasting it over. And once you accept it, as you can see, it already updated there as well. The Smart Guides feature was improved in Photoshop, and now it works similarly to InDesign. They will not only show you when you align things to edges, but it will also show you when you have the equal distance between multiple items. There's two new very important improvements on guides in Photoshop. One of them is that you can create a guide from a layout. So once you use this option, you can define how many columns and how many rows you need in your layout, and also the gutter in between them. And on top of that, you can even use margins and additional options. But you can also select a layer, like I selected the screen in this case. And if I go to View, New Guides from Shape, it will create guides around the edges of that selected layer. Thanks to the Isolate Layers feature, you can work much faster and more efficiently in case you use lots of layers in a design. All you need to do is to turn on isolation. Once you have that on, you can decide what you want to look for. In my case, I have Smart Objects selected, and I can only see these layers in my Layers panel. But the same way, I can filter for shapes, type, adjustment layers, or pixel layers. And there's also a lot of extra filtering options on top of the Layers panel. You can now use linked smart objects in Photoshop, which you can find under the File menu and choose Place Linked. Linking smart objects means that they will update not just in that document wherever you use them, but also in any other Photoshop documents wherever they appear. Since the Creative Cloud Libraries panel, now we can even link them to other Creative Cloud applications like InDesign or Illustrator. In this case, I have the logos on these stationaries all linked to an asset which I have saved into my Creative Cloud libraries. You can find that here at the bottom in the graphics area. If I switch back to Illustrator, I can actually edit that original graphic and, for example, change its colors. So I can go to Recolor Artwork, and then if I click on OK, save this, and go back to Photoshop, immediately the colors will update in both of the documents whenever I click on them. The Layers panel show that they are linked assets by adding a little cloud icon on the layer thumbnails. In case you use linked smart objects or linked assets, now you have an option from the File menu to package all the files connected to a Photoshop document. So if you choose that and you choose a folder, all the files linked to the Photoshop file will be saved into the same folder. So if we have a look at it in Bridge, you can see that is the folder that the package created. So next to the PSD file, we will have all the links. In this case, the vector artwork, which is the logo. In the Preferences dialog box, you will find Technology Previews, where you can enable Design Space, which is a completely new, modern, and streamlined user interface, especially for web and mobile app designers. So once you turn that on and click OK, Photoshop will look completely different. So you will have different panels, different tools, and different layout to work with. The Layer Comps panel has been around in Photoshop for a long time, but now it has been improved greatly. So now you can easily update either the visibility, the placement, or the effects on each of these layer comps individually. But you can also use and access layer comps within Smart Objects by using the Properties panel. So for this layout, I have two main layer comps. But within that, I also have layer comps for the menu smart object, which I can change here from 5 menu items to 6 menu items. So these things can be accessed much easier and also can be updated much faster by using Photoshop Creative Cloud. The generator feature can be enabled under Preferences plugins, and once it's enabled, you can use the File menu, Generate Image Assets option to automatically generate files from the layers. Each layer that has a name with a file extension at the end, the Image Asset option will automatically generate them in a separate folder. In this case, all these files will be saved out with the same name that I had on the layers, and they are saved as transparent PNG files. Generator can also be used for saving multiple versions from the same layer or layer group by adding commas and then describing what the next version should be. You can even use scaling in the file names by, let's say, 200%, type in another file name and file extension, will save out a twice as large version of the selected layer group or layer. In this case, I will have 4 different versions, 3 PNGs with different sizes, and a GIF file with the original size. Mainly because of these long layer names, Photoshop now allows to have 255 character long names. And if we have a look at these files here in Bridge, in the background, it's already been created. So there's my 4 different versions of the same file in different sizes and different formats, all created in the background using the generator feature. With generator, now you can also create an empty layer. Just type in default in the beginning, and then once you have that, you can create subfolders. For example, in this case, I'm going to have a high-res subfolder, and each file that goes in that subfolder will have the suffix 2x, and I will also have another folder called low-res, in which all the files saved out from layers will be half the original size. So if we now go back to Bridge, we can see that in the icon library assets, I already have these 2 subfolders. And if I check high-res, these are the actual size images with the 2x in the file names. And if I check low-res, these are the smaller versions, so half the original size. The file Save for Web is under Export, and it is a legacy format now because the new option is the Export As. Now, you can also select this from the Layers panel. If you select a couple of layers or layer groups, you can export them quickly and easily. So then you can select each of those elements that you selected and decide what format you want them to be saved into. Also, you can customize the image size, canvas size, and scaling options. You can now copy CSS codes very quickly and easily from Photoshop layers. All you need to do is to right-click, choose Copy CSS, and then I'm just going to show it to you quickly that this is the CSS code that's been generated. So this can be then copied into Dreamweaver or any other HTML editor application. In case you started naming your layers and layer groups for generator, you can also use the same method to take a Photoshop design into Adobe Edge Reflow. All you need to do is to go to Adobe Edge Reflow, click on the Photoshop Connect panel, and then create new page. That is going to connect to the currently selected document in Photoshop, and it will translate that into an Edge Reflow document. If I start changing the width of this page, you can see it already has some kind of responsive effect, but of course this is something that you can improve within this application. You can now work with artboards in Photoshop similarly to Illustrator in case you are working on multi-screen design projects. So if I go to File New, I can choose Document Type Artboard, and then I can select any device size here, let's say iPhone 6 Plus, and then if I click on OK, there's the first artboard. And there's another new tool called Artboard tool, with which I can select another size, let's say iPad Retina display, and I can click on plus. And that way I can create another artboard for that. These artboards will be created as layer groups, and you can also export these individually as PDF files or any other formats using the export as command. Working with artboards in Photoshop gets much better once you start working with the device preview panel. To be able to see your connected devices here, you have to make sure you download the Adobe Preview app on them, and you also log in with your Creative Cloud account. Once you do that, you can see the same thing that you have in Photoshop on your mobile device. You can even switch between the artboards. And the best thing is that if you go back into Photoshop and you resize something or make changes to any details, like in this case I changed the cycle, you can see it already updated on my phone. So it's really a live preview. Let me show you another example. And now instead of my iPhone, I'm going to check the design on my iPad. So as you can see, once again, I can scroll up and down in this design on my iPad exactly the way I would do it on a live website. And once again, of course, the changes will automatically update. So if I change something here, it will immediately update on my iPad as well. Typekit is a great supporting feature of Creative Cloud applications. All you need to do to use it in Photoshop is to go to the font selector, choose Add Fonts from Typekit. Once you selected the font that you like, simply click on Use Fonts and sync selected fonts. Then go back to Photoshop and select Filter for Typekit, and then you will be able to find the fonts that you just downloaded. In our case, it's the Expo Sun Pro Regular, and you can see already I'm using it in my design. Searching for fonts is also much easier in Photoshop, because now you can search for not only the beginning words of fonts, but also any word included in the font's name. So for example, if I type in sun, that will give me all the sans serif font options, and that way I can very easily select the ones that I like. Similar to InDesign and Illustrator, now Photoshop also has paragraph and character styles, with which you can save a lot of time, because instead of selecting multiple type layers and adjusting the text one by one, you can just redefine the style definition itself. Under Preferences type, you can find a new setting to change the behavior of the escape key whenever you use type. So instead of cancelling the text, you can use this shortcut to commit the text, which will be exactly the same what will happen in InDesign or Illustrator. So once I type in something, pressing escape now will accept typing. Just like in InDesign or Illustrator, now Photoshop has also a Glyphs panel, from which you can easily find all the characters within a font, and you can also filter for particular elements like currency symbols. And once you selected something, all you need to do is to double click to be able to place it in your text frame. Photoshop CC inherited all the features that were previously only available in the extended version. So now we have all the 3D editing capabilities, which means you can combine photographs and 3D layers in perfect harmony. And you can use the same features that you would use on images like painting. So for example, if I want to repaint this fish, I can select a color and start painting over it, just like I would do it on a normal layer. Working with 3D models in Photoshop is now much easier using the completely reworked 3D scene panel, where you can easily find a light source, for example, change that. You can work with the model or even the textures on the model, and you can very easily affect all the attributes that you need. You can also print 3D layers in case you have a 3D printer. All you need to do is to go to the Properties panel, select 3D Print Settings, then click on Scale to Print Volume, and then once you are ready with that, just click on this icon here, and then you will be able to see how the model will look like once it's printed, and we can even see the scaffolding that the printer will have to create to be able to make this model. Photoshop is compatible with most of the 3D printers out there. You can also export 3D layers from Photoshop into interactive PDFs. All you need to do in Photoshop is to right-click on the layer, choose Export 3D Layer, and then make sure you save it into the U3D format. Once that's selected, also make sure that the texture format is JPEG. Then click on OK, save it wherever you are going to find the file. And once it's saved, go into Acrobat and then choose the following option: File, Create PDF from File. Once you selected that, find the file that you saved from Photoshop and click on Open. You can also choose Show Advanced Options if you want to play around with these. But once you click on OK, you will have the 3D object within a PDF file, and you can send this over to anyone who has Adobe Reader, and they can also mark up and comment on it. Photoshop can now create automatically bump maps and normal maps from the diffuse map of 3D layers. All you need to do is to go to the Properties panel and choose Generate Bump from Diffuse. Once you do that, you can decide how you want the low, medium, and high values to work. So for example, if I change the medium, we can see it will affect how the bump map will look like. And then once I'm happy with the results, I can click on OK, and that will show up on the model. Maybe the only thing what we need to do additionally to that is to increase the level of the bump. We will see the whole object even more 3D than before, thanks to the bump map that we created. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Google+. Also, if you want to learn more about design, check out my in-depth online courses on my website, yesimadesigner.com.